Everyone can see, right? All right. So the first question I'll be going over is truthy. This usually trips some people up sometimes because I feel like the wording of the question is a little weird, but actually in reality what you need to do is not that hard, right? So if you remember from the lecture slides and the notes or whatever, you remember there's infinite number of truthy values, right? Because every non-zero number and every string with length are truthy, right? And we can actually narrow down the list to non-truthy values, to falsy values, to, I think, 5, right? So it's very easy. If I have this argument, arg, if coerce it into a Boolean equals true, we can return true. That is step 1, right? Because what is truthiness? It is not the value true. Truthiness is if a value were to be coerced into a Boolean and then that value is true. That's what truthiness is, okay? So we coerce it into a Boolean by passing arg into the global Boolean object and check triple equals true, checking to see if this is true, and then we return true. You can do it this way, or you can do it this way, right? Or you can do it this way, or you can do it this way. Because the if statements, the conditional statements, are already coercing the values into Booleans for you, okay? This is implicit coercion. Is everyone okay with this, right? There's many different ways to change something into a Boolean, okay? So, if this was a truthy value, this if statement would pass and we would get true, right? Cool. So now we have to look out for some falsy values, right? So we got false, we have null, we got undefined, we got 0, and we got empty string. We're not going to worry about not a number right now, because not a number isn't really a value. It's not, it's more of an error. Okay, so we're going to ignore it. So now, quite literally, if arg is triple equals to false, then we can return this is false or whatever. Whatever the question wanted you to return. It required certain strings for each values. They all referenced the value that was being passed in to show that you knew that these are all the different types of falsy values, right? So if this is this, then here we can do another if statement if arg is triple equals to null. Return this is null. You could have been doing type up this whole time, right? However, if I console.log, you might have ran into this problem. If I console.log type of null, you get object. From my understanding, this is a bug within JavaScript, from my understanding, okay? So type of usually isn't what you need to do, okay? Quite literally, you can just check if the value is null. And you do the same thing for everything else. Right? And then the empty string. Obviously, these strings are what we need to return. Look at the problem, and you'll see those long lists of strings. But this is generally what we wanted to do with this problem. Now that I did it this way, this is very simple for you guys, right? This is easier. You might have thought this was a harder way to do this when you guys were actually inside of the workshop. But this is actually a pretty simple problem, right? Correct? Cool. So I won't spend any more time on this, and I will go over the most difficult problem from last night, okay? 0, dark 30. So let me just comment this out real quick. Go down here. So first off, I say const 0, dark 30 equals anonymous function. 0, dark 30 should take in original value, okay? So what we want to do is we want this to be this. We want this number, 10,001, to be 11. So some of you might have said, let's loop through the number. No, you can't loop through numbers, okay? You can only loop through things that have indices, okay? Numbers don't have indices. So what can we do? If this entire workshop is about type coercion, what if we coerce that number into something we can loop through? Like a string, right? Exactly. So how do we do this? Oh, well, first off, if original value is equal to 0, return NaN. That was the first step. That was in the README. Just so you guys know, there is a README next to the specs in CodePen. Okay. Make sure you read me. Make sure you read the README before you start anything. So, what if I said original value and I just reassign it to be empty string plus original value? So now, if I do console.log 0 dark 30 and I pass in 10,001 and over here I console.log type of original value, what we get is a string. Okay? So we've coerced it into a string by doing it this way. All right? So, now that it's a string, what do we do? What is the actual logic behind this problem, right? If we wanted to loop through this thing, what are we actually going to do? If we see a 0, we should ignore it, right? We don't want that 0. So what if we just made an empty string and put everything that isn't a 0 in that empty string, and then coerce that into a number at the end? Does that sound like a good plan? Who disagrees with my plan? Exactly. This is a good plan. All right? So, let's say, go down a little bit, let new value equal empty string. And then we do for let I equals 0. I is less than original value dot length I plus plus. If you never coerce this into a number, numbers do not have a length property, okay? Also, if you really think about loops, you're not looping through anything, right? You're just running this code over and over again and making this number bigger. And you're using that number to access different indices inside of the string, right? You're not actually looping through the string. People just say loop through it, right? So numbers don't have indices, so you just couldn't do that, right? So we made it a string, we're looping through the string, and then we say if original value at I is not equal to the number 0? No, the string 0, right? Because we're looping through a string, right? So if it's not a 0, then we do new value plus equals original value at I. Then, once we've done that, once we've looped through the entire original value, we can return plus new value. Okay? So, when we console log this over here, we get 11. If I passed in 10.001, we get 1.1. This might have tripped you guys up as well. Don't you agree that 1.1 is a valid number? So you can coerce that string into a number, just like you normally would. Another way to do this, obviously, would be to return capital number, global number object, and pass in new string. Same thing. But, huh?
New value, not
Volume? Oh, value. Nope. My bad. So, here we have the same thing, right? This way, I like better because it looks cooler to me. Okay? Any questions on Zero Dark 30? Yeah.
Plus new value. Like, why do you put a plus?
It's shorthand for coercing the thing to the right into a number. If that thing wasn't a number, like if I console.log, I showed you guys this yesterday, if I console.log plus 55, right? I just get 55. But if I console.log plus undefined, what I get is not a number, right? So if you try to coerce something into a number that can't be, then you just get NaN. So this works the same way as the global number object, okay? Any other questions? I feel like writing out the solution for this problem wasn't that bad. However, thinking of the solution was a little bit more tough, especially when you saw that one of the examples had a decimal inside, okay? But now you know. So, any other questions before we get into scope? All right. So let's go to scope. Comment this out. Let me comment this out. Scope. So, today's lecture is more rule-based, like yesterday was, okay? Except with less syntax, okay? Scope is something that you all need to be aware of because it is in every single thing that you will be writing, right? Scope is defined as what variables can be accessed at what location in your code, right? So if I say let hello equal the string world, and I console.log hello, I get world, right? Right? I can do this because we are in the same scope, okay? There's three different kinds of scope. There's global scope, there's local scope, or functional scope, whatever you want to call it, and then there's also block scope. So, what does that even mean? So let's add this function, says hello. And then it's, what I do is console.log hello, comma, hello. So, comment this out, and then I says hello, and I run it, right? I still get hello world. I can still access this string world inside of this function. Okay? Because this variable hello was declared inside of the global scope. That means anything in a lesser scope can still access that. What if I do this? Will I still get hello? Right. I mean, I still get world, right? But what if I put let hello inside of the function? What will happen? I get an error. Hello is not defined. This is where scope rules come into play, okay? I'm defining hello inside of the function says hello, right? That means that this variable is declared and defined inside of a local scope of this function. I am trying to access that variable in the global scope, a scope above it, right? You could think of it as like the global scope, then you got your local scope, and then you have your block scope, okay? So when you're trying to access variables, you can never go down into scope. You are outside of this function. Things defined inside of here can't be accessed outside of them, okay? Does that make sense? Like kind of makes sense. You see the logic behind this, right? You can't access things inside. However, you can look out to the globe and access things out here. This doesn't change, right? We still get hello world, and we get the world now because this is in the same scope. Global scope. Local scope. Any questions? Okay, so what do I mean by block scope? Hello world, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, I is not defined. Because I is defined inside of the for loop definition. For loops have code blocks, right? Just like if statements, just like while loops. So that means that they have their own block scope. I is defined in here, just like if I said let will I reach here equal no, and I console.log, will I reach here? Will I reach here is not defined, okay? It is the same concept. I just wanted to show you that's why I can't be accessed outside. Anything you define in here can't be accessed outside of the for loop. As you can see, I am still inside the function, right? But I still can't access it because block scope prevents me from doing that. I cannot look down into the for loop. If this for loop was out here, what would happen? Says hello. Oh, gee. Oh, my God. I didn't do that. 1 second. So if the for loop is out here, I just get will I reach here is not undefined, is not defined. Because will I reach here is defined inside of the function, right? And I'm trying to access it here inside of the for loop. So, why can I still call the function? Why does it not say that says hello is not a function? Like, would this work if I did this? This looks terrible. Oh, jeez. Forgive me. What would happen now? Clear that for you. Now I says, no, this is not what I'm trying to do. So let's go back to what I had before over here, right? Okay. This goes here, this goes here, comment this out. So, what if I wanted to do this? Will this work?
Yes.
It will work, right? But if I do, yeah, see? This function doesn't really do anything important. But what if I did this? Const says hello equals.
You misspelled
Oh.
last.
Yep. Thank you. If I have a typo, just yell at it. Says hello is not defined. So why did one work and why didn't the other work? I hinted at this yesterday. This is because of hoisting, okay? Hoisting. So hoisting means that what JavaScript does, before it reads line by line, because JavaScript is single-threaded, right? It can only run one function at a time. So as we read line by line, before we're reading the code, JavaScript actually goes through the page, the whole page, and looks for two things: variable declarations and function declarations, function definitions, okay? And these things automatically get put into memory, okay? However, things that are being defined as variables with the const keyword, the let keyword, or the var keyword, don't use var, will be put into memory, but their values will not be read. Their values will be undefined, okay? It will be undefined. In REPL doesn't let you do this. If this was var, we would get a different error, right? Says, I guess REPL does this. REPL does this for you. It would usually say says hello is not a function, you know? Because there would be a value of undefined. If you define something with the function keyword, however, the function keyword, all of the code inside of the function actually gets put into memory immediately during hoisting. So that's why you can define all these functions at the bottom of your page and then run them all at the top, and it doesn't matter. Okay? Does that make sense?
You said functions and what else?
Functions and variable declarations. So like let, var, and const, right? But their values don't get hoisted. First, they are undefined. Then as we read line by line, then we say, oh, okay, const hello is equal to the string word, okay? But before all of that is happening, we put aside space in our computer for this variable that will be defined later to world, but hello is now just going to be undefined. Hasn't been defined yet, okay? Does that make sense? Cool. So, this looks like a mess. Let me just go back. Cool. Cool, 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 cool. Okay. Let's say I have function outer and then I have const const outer var equals outer, right? Then I define another function inside of outer called inner. And then in here, I have const inner var equals the string inner. And then inside of inner, I console.log outer var, comma, inner var. Right? Oh, this isn't inner var. And then, after I define this function, right? After I define this function, I will say inner invoked. And now I will console.log. Well, I don't have to console.log it. I could just run outer. Right? So, will we see outer inner in the console? Who thinks we will see that? Who doesn't think we will see that? No one, just no one's participating. That's awesome. we get outer inner, okay? Because we are console logging outer var and inner var from the innermost scope, right? Inner function has its own local scope. Now, let me go one step at a time. What is actually going on, right? So we have a function definition, and then we run outer, okay? Nothing actually happens. No code is executed until we invoke outer. Does everyone agree with me?
Yes.
Cool. So then we say, okay, const outer var equals a string. Cool. Then we have another function definition. Cool. Then we run inner. So now this inner function is running. So we do another variable declaration, inner var, and we set it to a string inner. And then we console.log outer var. So JavaScript's like, wait, hold on. What is outer var?
Outer.
Yeah, good job. However, the first thing we do is we look inside of our own scope for that variable. We look in our own scope first. We don't find it, so we look up a scope. We found outer var. So that's why we have this outer printed there. What if inner takes a parameter, outer var? It has the same name. And then I pass hello world into inner. We would get hello world inner. Do you know why? Because of scope. No, seriously. So outer var is defined inside of inner's local scope, right? So when we console.log outer var inside of here, we look at our own scope first. Okay? And we don't have to look up anymore because, boom, we found something. We found something with the same name. JavaScript's like, all right, found it. That's what I have to console log. We don't look anymore. We don't look out here. If outer var was all the way out here, we wouldn't look there either, okay? It would still be hello world inner. And if I don't pass anything into here, what would I get? Undefined inner. Outer var is still declared here. When you are defining functions with parameters, those parameters, if you don't pass anything into them as arguments, their values will be undefined, correct? You guys are aware of this, okay? You say, if this is undefined, make the starting index 0, right? That means it has a value, and its value is undefined. So if it has a value, then it exists. So if it exists, we won't look up into the global scope. We will find it right here, and it has a value, and it is undefined. Right? Does that make sense? This is confusing, okay? The way I wrote it. But there you have it. Any questions? Seriously. Yeah.
Why do you need to invoke the inner? Because I'm thinking like, all right, you're invoking the outer,
So
and
if
the
I-
inner is in the outer.
Exactly. So inner is an outer, right? So let's say I don't do this. What will I get in the console? I will just get undefined because I run outer, and what is outer returning? Nothing. So it returns undefined, right? So we get nothing in the console. However, why isn't this running? Just because we're defining inner here, when do we call inner?
Right.
Exactly. So this console log will never run, right?
Yeah, gotcha.
So if I just remove this, we get back outer inner. Right? Because now, when I call inner, I'm looking for outer var. It's not defined inside here, and it's not a parameter. So let me look out into the outer scope, the outer local scope first. Okay? If I had const outer equal, you know, I would get, what? Oh. I would get that, right? Because I don't look out here into the global scope because I already found something with the same name here. You can only look up, right? If I console.log outer var over here, I would get outer because that is defined out here. And if this was never defined out here, this was defined inside, and then this was deleted, then I would say error, right? Can't define it. Outer var is not defined. Cool? Yeah.
What if you put inner inside, outside?
If I put inner,
Instead of none of them.
oh, if I put inner over here, it would be the same error. Because inner is defined even one level down, past this one, right? So when I'm trying to access here, all I can see is this function called outer, and there's nothing else, right? So inner is not defined. We don't know what you're talking about. Because we cannot look down into scope, we can only look up. Right? Any other questions? Before I go into the slides. Yeah.
So, this specific like interaction is like does it appear in like every framework, or is it just like, or is there like special cases where some of them would be able to be able to
No, not in JavaScript. No.
I mean, like in JavaScript, it never happens, but like I'm just wondering like in other frameworks, like they would have like a different interaction.
Well, what do you mean by like a JavaScript framework?
Oh, sorry, no, I'm sorry,
Different languages? Probably not. I don't know. I don't know every language. This doesn't exist in Java, I'm pretty sure. And I don't know about Python. I don't know Python. I don't know.
Sorry, it was not.
It's okay. Yeah, I'm not sure about the rules of scope with other languages. Good thing we're only learning JavaScript. Because then I would be bad at my job. Okay, so now we will go into the slides. I guess. Cool. Does Solomita do slides? No? Oh, she does? All right, cool. One time I was teaching with this guy, Robin. He was like, yeah, I never use slides. I just do everything off the top of my head. And I was like, yo, just take it easy, man. All right, so what is scope? Types of scope, global functional block, functions of hoisting, and scope best practices. You guys just saw everything I had to say about scope, right? So as you can see, scope is more rule-based, okay? And it's not like, oh, I don't really like scope, I won't use it. Scope is just there, okay? And you have to be aware of it or you will find some very weird errors in your code, okay? So scope refers to which variables can be accessed by your code at a specific location in your code. Let wow equal the string wow. Console.log wow. What do you know? We get wow, okay? Let wow is declared inside of the global scope, and we access it here in the same scope. So there you go. Even though a global variable can be referenced from anywhere in your code, the value assigned to the variable cannot be accessed until after the assignment operation occurs. Console.log wait for it, let wait for it, here I am, wait for it. Undefined, wait for it, okay? So as you saw in REPL, you got an error, okay? So that's, I'm pretty sure that's just like a REPL thing, okay? So REPL has its own configurations to help developers. But this is what would happen. You would get undefined first because of hoisting, okay? Okay. So functional scope. Variables declared inside of a function are locally scoped. They cannot be referenced outside of the function. So if I have this function, happy function, and it says let message inside of that happy function, I am so happy. Console.log message, we get I am so happy when we run happy function. But then we say console.log message right underneath it. And we get a reference error. Message is not defined. Because JavaScript is saying, where is message? All I see is happy function. It can't look inside of here, okay? Because that is a scope down, scope level down. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So what if a variable is defined locally and globally? So let message equal think globally, function log a message. Then we have another thing, let message equal act locally. You can do this far down as you want. You can name the same define the same variable over and over and over again. Okay? However, when you log a message, you are only ever going to get the one in your current scope. Okay? So if, let's say you're doing a double for loop, you're looping through something, and then you do another loop inside of there. If you wanted to access the outer index, you would have to use I, right? So your inner loop should not be let I equals, it should be like let Y equals or something like that. So you can access both numbers. Otherwise, you would only, inside of the lower loop, access that I, never the outer, right? Does this make sense? We look in our own scope first, look for this message, found it, and then we stop looking, okay? We do not look up here or anywhere else because we found it in our own scope.
So always start from the heart.
Yeah, man. Always start from the heart. What if a variable is defined locally and globally? If it can't find it locally, JavaScript will look at the scope outside the function. In this specific case, it will be the global scope, right? So in console.logging message, here we have something let MSG equal act locally, right? We don't find it, so we go up and we find message up here. Right?
Yes.
Right. Parameters are also locally scoped. This can trick people, okay? Message here is act locally because we pass act locally into log a message here, right? We define let message up here equal think locally. We define a function called log a message, and then we invoke that function and we pass in a string act locally. Then we console.log that message because it's captured as this variable message. If I forgot the E here, this would say think global. Right? Because if I was trying to console log message, but in the own local scope we just had message, whatever, no E, then we would look up a scope and then we could look at think global, okay? I hate myself. All right. So consider nested functions, right? So I showed you something that looked a lot like this, right? So let global var equal global, function outer, let outer var equal outer, function inner, let inner var equal inner, right? This is easy to read, right? Variable, function, variable, console log, close the inner function, close the outer function, invoke the outer function, okay? When we invoke that outer function, we define let outer var equal outer, then we define this function inner, and then we invoke that function inner. So let's run inner. We define inner var, and then we console.log global var, outer var, inner var, global outer inner. We look for global here first, then we look for it here. Then we look for it in the global scope, and that's where we found it, okay? Just like outer, we look for it in inner first. We're looking for all of these things in inner first. Then we always look to outer. We found outer var here, and then there it is. Does that make sense? Does that make sense, everybody?
Yes.
Does anybody have any questions about scope? Nothing? Not too bad, right? So here we have a collision, right? We have two things colliding. When we call outer and we pass in outer, that means this parameter collision is now equal to this string outer, right? But when we call inner, we define inside of inner another variable that has the same name, collision, and we set it equal to inner. So when we console.log collision, we look at our own scope first. So that's why we get inner. Okay? Cool.
Is the inner from the function inner? That.
Yes. Yeah.
Can you call the inner function without calling outer?
No. Well, yeah. I feel like I would say no, but I feel like I did this before and something weird happened. So if I do like function hello, and then I have function goodbye. Nope. And I have console.log made it, and then I call goodbye here. Oh no, I can't do it. Yeah, no. No, I can't do it.
No.
Okay? Because function is being declared inside of hello, inside of a different scope, right? So scope, I feel like I did you guys like glimpse me doing something weird like that before when I was going on crazy up here?
Yeah, I asked.
Yeah, right, yeah, there's something weird, whatever. So, oh, that was in, no, that was in, that was in, wait, hold on. So that was actually in, now I remember. Block scope is different. Aha. Oh, so now that I'm here, I can guess a reason to why this is happening. I don't know why for sure, but I feel like it has something to do with the same reason that I don't like the var keyword. So if I do var hello equal to world, and I do hello is now equal to goodbye outside of that, and I console.log hello, I get goodbye. I get world. var ignores block scope. This could lead to a lot of problems, okay? This is why var isn't good, okay? Because of this problem. It ignores block scope. So I feel like maybe the function keyword does that too. That's my guess. I'll look into that and I'll let everyone know later, if I remember. Okay? Yeah.
How about if we declare the cons and then pass a function? Then can we grab that?
Like
Some variable dot say goodbye?
like the same way, except if this was const.
But without the block. Yeah. Cons hello. const hello.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. No, you cannot do that because const. Okay, so then function keyword does ignore block scope. Okay, I just proved it to you. The const keyword doesn't though, because you can see I'm defining this variable hello with the constant keyword, setting it equal to an anonymous function inside of this block, this if block. Then out here, I'm trying to access that variable. Can't do it. Okay. Function keyword is really a special keyword. It does a lot of different things, okay? So you can say that this is a better way to define a function, however, because of things like this, right? Like this will throw an error feed because this isn't correct code. You shouldn't be doing something like this, okay? There is also another big difference between the fat arrow function and function keyword that we'll get into next week. Okay? So now, back to this, I did this. So now, we pass outer into here, and then we removed collision from inner. So now we look for collision in inner and it's not there, and we find it here and it has a variable here, outer. So that's why we get outer in the console, right? Same thing, except now we're still passing in the string outer into this function, but we don't actually have a parameter here to capture that value. So we get global, because collision is still defined out there. Right? If you pass, you can pass an infinite amount of things into a function. But nothing will ever happen to them if you don't have parameters set up to capture those values and put them in variables. Okay? Like nothing's gonna happen, you know? Does that make sense? More of the same example. So here, we have outer var over here, inner var over here. And we console log outer var, inner var. Then we run that, so we get outer inner like normal. But then we try to console log inner var here. We still can't go into that function scope, even though we are in a local function scope. Every function has its own scope. If there's another function defined inside of that function has its own scope. So we cannot, outside here, we're in the outer function scope, we cannot go into the inner function to find inner. So we get the reference inner is not defined. Questions? Come on. Questions? All right. So, the inner function still looks for a local declaration of the variable name before looking at the next level of scope. Even if outer var we have here, even though we don't pass anything into inner, outer var is still undefined, so we won't look up here because it's still declared. It's still there. It has a value, you just gave it nothing. You gave it undefined, right? Because you give it nothing, then it is undefined. So we have undefined inner. I showed you that as well in the row, right? Remember? Like 20 minutes ago? Any questions? So now we have block scope. If true, any block of code inside of curly brackets, creates its own scope. If true, let block equal a string Jenny from it. Const.log that variable block, and then the string block. So here, this is true, so it runs. We get Jenny from the block. But then you try to console.log block down here, this variable, and we get a reference error. Not defined. Does that make sense? Simple, right? The pre-ES6 var keyword ignores block scope. as you can see, console.log block, we still get Jenny from it. We can access this variable outside of it. And we can change that too. Okay. That's why we don't use varchar. We don't use it. What else don't we use? The double equal sign, right? Someone used it the other day. I got upset. No, I'm just kidding. So functions defined with the function keyword, function declaration, can be run on any line in this file. Variables and function declarations are moved to the top of their scope. Top of their scope, okay? Not the top of the global scope. Top of their scope, okay? Before code execution. So when we run will this work, even though will this work is defined down here, it still does, okay? So if we define this with let instead of the function keyword, functions defined with letter const can only be run after the line on which they were defined. Type error, will this work, is not a function. Because what is will this work when we hoist it? Undefined. So when we try to run it, it's undefined. Right? If you try to invoke undefined, you get will this work is not a function, because undefined is not a function. Right? So, functions generally should not change globally scoped variables, okay? We have this always should be true variable up here, but this function, don't mind me, it's just gonna change it to false. So then when we invoke don't mind me, and we have to make a check somewhere down our line that's saying all is well, otherwise we throw an error and everything is broken. So we get everything is broken, because we changed that global variable. Inside of your function, if there's a variable out top, up in the global scope, you have access to it, right? So you can change it. You can. This will almost always cause problems for other functions or other things that are referencing that variable, that expect that variable to be one thing, okay? So, rule of thumb, if there's something defined globally, just don't change it, okay? If you want to have like a counter or something, try to put that in your local scope. You can also use this knowledge as like a tool to help you solve other problems. I don't know, like maybe you do want your counter in the global scope. It all depends on the problem, right? And yes, there's a global error object in JavaScript. Okay? And yes, there's a throw keyword. And yes, there's a new keyword. A lot of new things on this slide. Any questions? It's just best practice, okay? Don't change global variables from a function. Don't do it. This is okay because we're just creating a local variable, right? We are no longer changing this variable that relies on this code to run. So we would get all as well, right? Because here we declare another variable that has the same name, but in a lower level of scope. If we've omitted the let keyword, then we would be changing that global variable, right? Whoop. So avoid cluttering the global namespace with lots of variables. You really shouldn't be making a bunch of variables outside of your functions. Like in your code pen, when you're writing like function this equals that, don't put variables outside of that, right? Put them inside of your function. Variables that have to do with what your function is trying to solve should be declared inside of its own global scope, inside of its own local scope. Shouldn't be declaring variables inside of the global scope that you know won't have anything to do with the rest of your code, right? So just avoid cluttering the global namespace and with a lot of variables, right? And only declare variables globally if they need to be accessed globally. If like you have one solid source of data or something and you need 5 different functions to access that, right? Then, yeah, sure. But if you have like I, and for a while loop, 5 functions deep, don't put that in the global scope, right? Makes sense. Otherwise, it's safer to declare variables and functions or blocks so you don't overwrite variables accidentally or access the wrong variable by mistake. Both very likely sources of bugs. Okay? So, we talked about scope, global functional and block, hoisting, and a little bit about best practices. Any questions before you take a 5-minute break? Then you will start the workshop. This workshop's a little tricky. Little tricks.
Always tricky.
Little tomfoolery going on, alright? Alright, 5 minutes, alright? I'll slack out pairs at 7:45.
Nowhere.